I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guest is my good friend, Chris Griscom, who is the founder and head of the Church of the Sanctuary of Light, the Nizoni School for Global Consciousness, and the Light Institute of Galileo. Welcome
Galisteo.
back. Galisteo, sorry.
Here we are in the Middle East.
I mean, those of you who do not know Chris, where have you been for the last year and a quarter? Chris is a regular, and we're going to talk about that too. Today's prophetic topic is healing can only originate on a spiritual level. And you've heard me say that on almost every show, and we're going to get into it today. This topic comes from Chris's book, and I want to hold this up here. I did a lousy job of scanning, so it came out grainy. This is the book. You want to contact them. They're going to flash contact information. It's called The Healing of Emotion, Awakening the Fearless Self. It is wonderful. This book is so good, we're only going to get through in an hour, maybe 20 some odd pages of content. You want to read it. Anyway, we'll show it again in a little bit. So the paragraph reads as follows. Our experience in Galisteo has been that the cause of any emotional problem can be uncovered. Healing comes by dissolving separation and finding our way back to oneness. The goal is always to dissolve our personal karma by seeking true self. Healing can only originate on a spiritual level. Now that basically covers it all, but we're going to break it down into even more simplistic terms. But before we do that, introduce yourself to the few people who don't know who you are. And I also want to talk about, Chris, all this wonderful information in all these books. I mean, Chris, you've about 14 books you've written? Mm-hmm. And we're going to do a book every couple of months, so Chris is going to keep coming back as long as I'm on the air. Where does this information come from? Where do these understandings come from?
Well, I would always say that they come from my higher self, which is my own inner knowing. And all of us have a higher self. All of us have this kind of wisdom. You know, Reverend Phil, when I write these books, I never feel as if I'm bringing something particularly new to the world. I'm just saying, hey, do you remember this? Mm-hmm. Do you know that other people feel the way you do? Do you know that other people have these experiences? Because once a person recognizes that they're not alone, it's very helpful. It heals them. And so I would say that, first of all, knowledge comes from experience. And of course the trick is to understand, no, understand isn't the word, to embrace and be able to live your experience from a higher octave, from the octave of consciousness, which of course is spiritual.
And that's one of the phrases I wanted to touch on. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
When you say it comes from your higher self, are we talking about like sitting down and writing something and having information come through that says, I don't know where I know that from, but I know it's real and I know it's true?
I think that's part of it. Writing is not that easy for me. You know, some people just sit down and it feels as if it's all just given to them. And they love that. It's never been like that for me. But certainly I can hear that inner voice, which all of us did as children, that says, this way. You know, whether it's turn your wheel in a car accident, which I experienced once, or it's a point of illumination that says, do you see what that person is feeling? Are you listening to that person? Or a single word that might say, you know, love, for example. And those messages or those awarenesses that we have inside ourselves are what give us the illumination that has caused me to write these books. Again, just to remind other people, this book, The Healing of Emotion, came to me because the way I started this work was that I realized that the emotional body just keeps repeating itself. It doesn't live in time and space. So whatever you've experienced as a child, whatever your conclusions are, you're basically still working off those. And I found that the only way to really get someone to get off that track, outside of that groove, was to introduce them to, quote, their higher self, to a place of peace inside, to the sense of centering that took them away from spirituality as something that's, I must say my prayer, I must do this. From the outside world to, oh, I feel I'm okay. Everything's all right. That kind of energy that supports the courage that we all have as souls to come into body. It takes courage to wander around this world.
You've just touched about 7 or 8 topics that are on this list in one little
I'm very holographic.
sentence.
Sorry.
I mean, let's jump to the middle.
All right.
The first phrase you used was the emotional body. In the book, you talk about, and this is not the complete quote, but basically that we are a dynamic living tapestry of several bodies woven together.
Yes.
Which was a beautiful phrase.
Thank you.
And then you talk about them and you give them a sequence, and I put them in reverse. I changed the sequence, and I want to talk about this for a little bit.
Super.
You put them in from the least to the greatest, so to speak. So you had mental, physical, then you had spiritual, then you had emotional.
Yes.
So you replace, and you made a statement that the emotional body is like the most powerful, yet now you're saying that spirit heals it. Can you clarify?
Yes. The reason that I said that is that we are all very mental. I would say most people live from here up. You know, the world is all about what you think. And you think that you think only here. What we know is that every cell of the trillions of cells of your body have mind. So we have emotional mind. And so that emotional mind can direct the way you live your life. It does direct the way you live your life. But it doesn't have any influence over your emotions. In other words, you can say, it doesn't benefit me to be angry.
But you'll get angry anyway.
And you're going to get angry anyway.
Sure.
And if you can stuff it, if you can control it enough, you'll just see it on television, and everybody around you will get angry. And they'll try to trigger you. And so what I've learned is that the emotional body controls the rest of it, not the mental body, because I separate out emotional body and mental body. The mental body can influence your physical body. You know, you can slow down your heart rate. You can shift the energies of your internal organs. We've proven that. But you can't, through your mind, control your emotional body. Since your emotional body says, I'm safe, or I can be loving, or I don't care if you win the argument, or I will give up my life for you, as soldiers do, you have to get to a higher octave there. You have to be able to get rid of the self some way to do that. And so what I found is that when the spiritual body is whispering to you, you can let go of a lot of the conclusions that you have. And it's only when you access that you feel peaceful and that you're willing to say, okay, I forgive you. I let go of you. And so I had to begin to reference how we could, and in what way could we bring the spiritual body into our consciousness in such a way that it could shift or educate the emotional body.
How?
How? By having spiritual experiences. By claiming your spiritual right. You see, most of us feel as if we were brought into this world by our parents and that we are somehow the victim of our surroundings. Sometimes we like that, sometimes we don't. But when we begin to explore something more cosmic, something bigger, we begin to see that religious, let's say, imprint that says there is free will. means much more than we ever understood it. And so how we do it is that we give ourselves spiritual experiences. Now, it's interesting, Reverend Phil, that most people, when I would say to them, could you tell me about a spiritual experience that you've had? Because I wanted to use their language, not mine. And they would say, I was walking in the desert one time, and I looked up and I saw a shooting star. And all of a sudden, I felt safe. I felt like it was okay. Almost never do they say, I was praying in church and I felt God's presence. And so I had to begin to say, why is that? Why is it that people, when asked about a spiritual experience, will bring themselves back to nature? And therefore, how do we help them to take that experience of seeing the shooting star and feeling safe and allowing that to be what calms their emotional body and allows them to face their life? And that's how my work began.
Well, for most part, congregational ministries focus the individual outward at whoever's the head of the congregation.
That's right.
Whether it's the pastor, whether it's the choir, whether it's the piano player.
Beautiful.
It's always, let's look out here for something as opposed to let's look in here for something.
And I speak about that very much in the healing of emotion, the fearless self, because the repertoire that is used very often is about pleasing God. So again, it's the exterior, it's the external. What does God expect of you? What are you to do?
Which
and
makes
that
the
was
assumption that God expects something at all.
Exactly. The assumption it makes, which is true, is that our view of God is wrapped in the repertoire of our own cultures and our own societies.
Which is wrapped in our own fear, which makes God small. To think that I have the power to please God in any shape or form is absurd.
I love that you say that. It's totally absurd.
And
it's buying and selling. And we humans are completely addicted to buying and selling. Hey, God, if I say my prayers today, will you make my mother well? And I have to say, by the way, that I learned this lesson in a very humorous way. I once wore the robes of the Franciscan nuns in Mexico because my mother was ill, and so I was bargaining with God. I said, look, I'll wear these robes and I will do all my prayers if you'll just make my mother well. And eventually, of course, I had to realize that I was trying to manipulate for what I thought was good. And as long as the world is about what we think is good, it will always be in polarity. So thank you so much for bringing out the outer and the inner, because it really comes from the inner.
I want to back up for a second because we had a little inside joke here that Chris and I were having a conversation. Before I do that, hopefully the camera's here. This is the book we're talking about. You got to read it, must read. They're flashing the information on the screen. Call, order it. It's so chock full of goodies, you won't believe it. Before we started rolling camera, we were talking about forgiveness. And that's when Chris mentioned forgiveness, and we both kind of giggled. So let's let everybody in on the giggle. Which there's a phrase you use in the book. Where is it here? Join cosmic giggle to find peace. Let's talk about that before we go to forgiveness.
That was something that I've learned from the experience of being with prisoners, people dying, of the most tragic experiences, either life and death or something a little bit less, but ruinous to somebody. And discovering that there is a giggle. In other words, that they see that this is what is true. But if you could expand and see all the points of reference, how did they get in that place? Is there something good that happens from death, for example? So it's a very expanded view. But I recognize that there was a little giggle that says, you know what, you're safe no matter what's happening to you. You will survive this, even if you die from it.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. So let's even back up a little bit further for a second. What we're really talking about is transcending the limited message of who and what we are that we get from most religions.
You are so brilliant. Exactly.
And then that takes us to that question, told me about a spiritual experience, then every experience I have is spiritual.
That's right.
Every
That's
experience gives me the opportunity to choose spirit or lower self or whatever we want
Yes.
to define in my reaction to it.
Yes, but we can separate. We can release the separation, our higher self, our lower self, and recognize it through the experience. Let's say we have a lower self experience, if you want to use that vocabulary, meaning that our ego got in the way, or we were aggressive, or we did something we can't forgive ourselves for, and we can learn from that. We can, instead of hiding from it, shunning it, we can look at it and say, that's not my true self.
Exactly.
It's not my true self.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I say in all my books, and certainly in that book, is that we are not our emotional body. Our emotional body is a thinking, living entity inside us, like a possession for most people because it's so negative. It's whispering to you, watch out, they're going to win the argument. Watch out, they're not going to love you. See that? They did that to you. Instead of, well, why did they do that to me? Is there a way I can heal it in them instead of having the whole world about the self? No.
And that brings us to a number of different places. One of them is karma.
Yes.
And that this emotional body is one of the means with which we meet ourselves karmically.
Yes.
And create new karma if we need to.
Yes. Well, we always create new karma because karma, the word karma, actually means action. So whatever you do creates a reaction. So maybe you do something selflessly for someone. You really help them with a sense of self or the pain of guilt or whatever it is. And that's an action, and it will create a reaction. And every religion has had that thought form that what you put out comes back eventually. So that's karma too. You can have spectacular karma, you know? And we want to feel that already happens, that the peace that we feel when we reach out and we have intimacy or we connect to another person, because humans need to connect. When we connect to another person, that is already the karma. It has answered itself like that. You have received a sense of peace because you've participated. That's the law of karma.
Or I receive a sense of disease or distrust or disharmony because of how I'm reacting.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. But again, as you were pointing out before, if instead of having our whole consciousness chattering about what the other guy is doing, what God is doing, what the congregation is doing, what your partner is doing, what your boss is doing, if you come back into the self, find that point of center, which is spiritual. So what I meant about the cosmic giggle is that even if you're having a terrible experience, you will survive it, and it will teach you something, and the purpose of life is the evolution of the soul. And so your emotional body is going to grow through that. It's going to be able to be calm. I'm safe. That's an emotion. That's a sense of self. I'm safe.
As long as I turn to spirit. That's the only place I can be safe.
Yes.
Yeah.
But turning the conversation then is, how do we turn to spirit, and what does that mean? Because for most people it's very specific. And what you and I are talking about right now is whispering to everyone out there, you're always with spirit. You're always with the divine source. Whether you're in a car accident or you're driving down the street or you're waiting for your place in line, if you use consciousness, which I'm talking about in that, the healing of emotion, if you use consciousness, you can be at peace because you can see the world differently. Instead of hurrying, why don't you hurry up so I can get buy my things and go home? You can stand there and say, what an opportunity this is. That guy is tense. That's going to make him ill, you know. What color do you need from me? How can I, maybe I smile at them, or I touch them with my hand, or I say, go ahead. And it calms them. And so suddenly, you feel good.
Going to get to that.
Okay.
We're having too much fun.
I know, this is very fun.
The first chapter in your book.
Yes.
The book.
The book.
The book. Okay. You want to read this? I've been saying that. Okay. Is the separation trauma. And then the first subchapter is called leave taking.
Yes.
And you talk about the variety of traumas that come from basically in some form or another abandonment. It's not the word you use. I'll use that word. And then what we just talked about, you specified that the greatest trauma is from the universal consciousness through incarnation. So that as we come into this physical body,
Yes.
the more that we are in this body, the more we start to separate. So that the young child, infant, even in the womb is connected.
Exactly.
And then the more that we are having to acclimate to the physical body,
Exactly.
the more we lose that connection, the more we know something's missing, but nobody's there to guide us to what's missing, and we're not capable of self-guidance at that point, so we just feel this loss.
That's right. And if we could expand and say, and come back to the power of purpose, that you chose from your brilliance, from your divinity, to come into body, to be a human, to be here and live a life, an incarnation of your soul, that comes from a powerful place, not a weak place, then you can recognize that you don't have to be separate. But there is a sense of individuation. What I talk about in that book is the individuation, from being the one soul, the cosmic energy, and to take on form and say, this is my individual body. Because we have the illusion that Chris and Phil are separate, but you and I know that we're not. But when people suddenly have that aha, then perhaps they can say, well, I'm not alone, I'm okay. Instead of, it's all about, being born, being separate from my mother's breast, from having to go to school, to all those leave takings.
Yeah, that's the phrase you use.
Yes.
I've been in the spiritual media, call it, I don't know if a better term, about 10, 11 years now. And it's been a gift. I get to meet wonderful people like yourself. I don't know, 10 years, average 40 people a year, so maybe some 400 and some odd people I've met through the media, the shows I've done. I'd say 2 or 3 of them were actually incarnated into a family that was highly spiritual. They were, from the moment they were able to walk, they were put into spiritual training. So they got that message. There is a God, you're one with that God, and
Imagine.
And yes, and their life reflected that. The rest of the people, in one form or another, had to kind of stumble their way through pain.
Survive,
and then get to a place where some form of surrender happened and the alternative was presented, and then some form of acceptance takes place. So I guess what I'm starting to say is what the process you're talking about requires, in most instances, somebody there to guide that child at the very beginning.
Well, the world would be very different if there were people that would do that. And I feel that we're coming to that because of your spiritual media. You may have only worked with 40 people a year, but think how many hundreds of thousands have met you and heard that message. That we are always embraced in cosmic divine energy. And that, I think what I want to say in relationship to that is no matter how terrible your childhood, no matter what unspeakables you have participated in, you are a divine being. And that it's time to put your attention onto that. Put your attention onto that instead of because. And what I would say from the law of karma is you chose your parents. That doesn't make them wrong or you wrong, but it means that you're balancing something. It's a way you're teaching yourself. Now, I feel that we can teach ourselves from the positive rather than from the negative, but we shouldn't spend our lives beating ourselves up because we engaged in an unspeakable. Because from a purely spiritual level, Reverend Phil, there is no such thing as a stranger. Anyone you have killed knew you. And on some level gave permission. There is a law of permission.
Signed up for it. Yeah.
Signed up for it. It doesn't make it okay, but it means that you can use it. You don't have to be caught there for the rest of your life. That's what I mean about people who have had terrible childhoods. That does imprint them.
But we also get that message, unfortunately, from a lot of what we think are spiritual institutions that we're
Yes.
damned to hell.
Yes.
I mean, if you go into and everybody knows which one I'm talking about, but you show up at church and they tell you, well, you're damned to hell just because you were born.
That's right.
I mean, how do you have any hope?
That's right.
So I mean, you get stuck in that self-loathing.
And then if your parents don't have you baptized or don't take care of that, then you're really going to go to hell. Even if you were to die, because I've been with hundreds of dying babies, even if you died as a baby, this has to be the conversation of humans. This is not a message from the divine source.
Exactly, but we don't know that because we get it so overwhelming out there. I mean, I've had two people I've worked with over the years who had both, one from a car accident, one from a drug overdose, had thought they were going to die, had been given last rites, and then survived and told, well, you're going to hell anyway because I gave you last rites and you didn't die.
Oh my!
I mean, to me, this
Well,
is...
again, that has to be a lack of education on the part of their spiritual teacher at that point, who has not obviously had that experience. Because first of all, anyone that dies and comes back to life, just looking at that, there is purpose in all experience. There is progress. There is evolution. If you come back from a death experience, you have a gift. You have a gift to give the world. So hopefully they just laughed and realized that they had gone beyond that person.
Unfortunately
They had to
not,
come to you
because
to
this
learn
is
it.
the religions they were brought up with. This is what they were told to believe. And we're drifting off topic, so I want to try to bring it back.
Right.
So to overcome all this, what we really need is guidance in the spiritual realm to show us how to get there.
That helps a lot. I mean, when I use the example of nature, and I would say anyone without guidance can have a connection to their higher self, can have a connection to the divine energy through a natural experience, whether it's death or nature, that's true. But it really, really helps to have someone that upholds and expands their sense of self as being spiritual in essence.
Well, the subtitle of the book, The Healing of Emotion, Awakening the Fearless Self.
Yes.
If I'm not the only way I know how to get to fearless is by being in spirit.
I agree with you 100%.
So if I'm stuck in my lower self, whatever component is in charge at the time,
yes, which is possessive.
yeah, I'm
Doesn't
not
want
going
to give you over to peace or joy or ecstasy or oneness. Certainly not.
I'm not going to be fearless.
That's right.
I'm going to be in fear because that's the function of the emotional body. So that's going to segue into another part of this.
Okay.
Before we do that, there was a subcategory when you talked about leave taking, and the phrase you used was about coming into incarnation is being governed by a different set of energy laws. Can you explain that to the people watching?
Yes. When we talk about being human, the energy laws have to do with the direction of energy. And the thing that is a problem in terms of the emotional body is that the baby in the womb is sucking in all the fears and angers of the mother and picking up psychically those of the father. And so the definition of self as it unfolds in this fetus is a conversation of survival rather than being a part of, which is energy going in the opposite direction. So in the book, this book, The Healing of Emotion, I have a chapter on exercises in consciousness, and I talk about, imagine that you could bring love. You talk, what's the word? Love and light. If you could bring actually love and light in from the cosmos into your body, into every cell of your being, then there would be a law of energy that allowed for cosmic laws to touch you, not just physical laws of direction. And that would bring great peace to people. And rather than, as I'm talking about in that leave-taking, that the reaction of most people is well, it can be yin or yang, it can be fear or anger. And most people are born right away with anger.
Okay, that was going to get me to the next, because you talked about, and I'm just going to, again, these are like little phrases I extracted in the sequence. Multidimensional beings, body is separation, and beginning of fear, anger, and anguish comes from that separation.
That's right. Thank you for bringing it back to that. Because, again, through the process, the experience of individuation, having your own cells, having a brain that tells the body, beginning that kind of experience, we begin to put our attention on this instead of the divine energy coming through us. And so our reaction is anger. We're disconnected, we're helpless. And when we feel helplessness, we feel anger. And most people have a lot of anger. And as long as you are angry, again, you can't see very far. You cannot have a consciousness that could let bygones be bygones, so to speak, or could turn away from something that doesn't serve you. And so then the emotional body just keeps repeating the anger. Why? Because the emotional body is physiological. It's not a concept. You know, we think of the ego as a concept. The ego is just a small part of the emotional body. The emotional body is attached to the endocrine system. It's attached to the vagus nerve that influences the brain. And so every time you are angry or frightened, it creates a biochemical response in your body, and your emotional body becomes addicted to it. It's delicious. If you ever felt absolute fear, it's exciting.
So is the physical body. They've done research where we as human beings are basically, if we have one emotion that's predominant, we become an emotional addict.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
What they talk about is each emotion we have is, they call it, it's a peptide chain.
That's right.
And each peptide chain is made up of proteins. So it's like going into Baskin Robbins.
Yes.
And it's
Which
like
flavor
32
are you into
flavors.
at the moment?
Well, I want cherry vanilla, and don't talk to me about chocolate.
Yes.
And if, you know, like the fear is different than the anger, then it's different from the love, and each one has its own flavor. And there comes a point where if that one is predominant, the cells which feed off these proteins become addicted to that one flavor, and they don't want pistachio, they don't want rum raisin.
Exactly, and that is the point of this book, that in terms of the only way to heal the body, as you're saying, is through spiritual experience. That's what I'm talking about there too. For example, if you are there and you are really taken by the shooting star or a beautiful sunset or a beautiful flower, for a moment you forget all the chatter of the outside world. For a moment you're just embracing that flower. That creates a peptide that quickens the brain, and suddenly the brain says, give me some more of that love stuff, give me that beauty. And that's why I feel that beauty, for example, is very important. No matter how poor we might be, we have to have something that's beautiful around us, because that brings us peace. So does love and light and ecstasy and rapture and bliss. I love ecstasy, rapture, and bliss, because when you actually feel that, that's why I say experience is the only truth. When you feel ecstasy, you forget about everything else, and it starts the emotional body being able to reach up to a higher level, and that's what changes us.
And that's like in chapter 2, we start talking about sexual and spiritual energy being almost the same.
Yes. And the reason I think this is very important, especially since in our religious perspectives, we do have a collective conclusion that sexuality is bad. Right after Jesus died and they thought that he was going to come back, that Christ would return, the first priests decided that sexuality was bad because it would keep them from being able to go to heaven. So they decided that they would put a no-no on that, and we have built on that ever since, because it's a great way to, it's an illusion that we can control people that way indeed. But what I understand from my own inner wisdom and my higher self is that sexuality is the way, it's the vehicle of coming into body. And since you cannot get into body without the permission of the soul, then sexuality, the way my higher self says it is, sexuality is the closest energy to spirit.
I was just going to say, the vibrations are so much the same.
That's right.
That's
full of
why
life, potential. Yeah.
But that potential is also freeing, and the last thing these institutions want is for us to be free.
That's right.
You know,
I'm sad to say that this is true.
So we better be careful before they start dunking us or burning us somewhere.
That time is gone, I want to say to you all.
I wouldn't count on that, but that's okay. I want to back up for a second because
Yes.
going back to that, I think it's the third or fourth chapter in the first subchapter in the first real chapter. You there with the camera? This is the book we're talking about. Wonderful. If you think this conversation is interesting, enticing, illuminating, read the book. Call, order it. They got plenty of copies. Tell them you heard it on Reverend Phil's show. Okay. I liked what you said in the section about anger and separation, that using the power of anger to progress along the spiritual path, that the source of anger is the illusion of separation. Mm-hmm. So every time I feel angry, it's because I think I'm isolated and I have to take care of this just by Phil.
Yes, that God is not going to take care of you, that no angels, there's a lot of stuff about the guardian angels, no guardian angels protecting you, that you're not protected. So what I say is that anger is what's called yang or masculine. It's the aggressive part, it's the part that takes action. Now there is a good part of anger in that it'll get you out of bed sometimes. Sometimes we have to stand up for ourselves, and we haven't learned yet how to do that diplomatically. But it will create a change. Anger will push you. But what I have discovered is that always under anger
is fear. Yes.
I can't do this myself. I feel helpless, and that makes me mad. It makes me mad to feel helpless. I'm going to survive this no matter what, and no one's helping me. And then we get into blaming God and our parents and our bosses and everybody else.
And that also takes us into that concept we have in this society that we shouldn't feel pain. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So if we don't feel pain, what we wind up with is suffering. Uh-huh. But if we allow ourselves to feel the anger, for instance, not deny it, then we could say, okay, something is off center here. I'm off center here. How do I deal with it?
What's underneath the outburst? Because always there's the outburst, and then what usually happens is we begin to rationalize. We use the mind body. We rationalize our emotional body's outburst, and we say, well, I did that because you were unfair to me, or I did that because of you. So we
because
externalize
I think you have
our
the
lives.
power to actually hurt me because now I'm separate.
That's right.
Yes.
And so that fear is always about, you don't love me, I have no worth. I can't tell you the thousands of people that work with me, and if I had to pick one theme, because we always look at things as a theme at the Light Institute, the one theme would be, I am unworthy. Mm-hmm. I'm unworthy. I'm sure you see that in your work as well.
Yeah.
No one thinks I'm worthy. I can't do it right. No one respects me. I have no value, and therefore I deserve to go to hell. And that's the terrible thing, is we actually buy into an absurd illusion that we should be punished, or that anything outside us is going to choose for us.
But that goes right back to the original premise of the book, which is that we are not told we're spiritual, so we're already separated from the source, and then it gets reinforced that I'm not okay. Nobody's sitting there and saying, hey, this is a lesson, it's okay, go.
Yeah.
You'll live the lesson and experience it and figure out how to do it next time.
That's right. And what can you earn from it? What can you learn that will support your true self, which is always divine, and then be able to see the outside world from your perspective, looking out to learn from the outside world rather than saying the outside world is the truth and I'm not the truth.
I'm going to, again, anger and separation. And again, these are like, I've extracted words out of sentences, but separation leads to loneliness, which leads to merging with something outside of ourselves.
Exactly. And merging with something outside of ourselves means that we get confused about who we are, and we accept what the outside world, be it religion, be it parents, be it society or teachers, tell us that we are. And, all psychologists have been saying for forever and ever, whatever you tell a child that it is, that's what it'll become.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Those are the models and the templates of how we become human.
So when a child comes in and suffers the separation, it's not only disconnecting from its source, it's also disconnecting from the concept of unconditional love.
That's right. That's
and
right.
it's not getting unconditional love from its parents
Which, of course,
because
it can't.
it starts as something defective with me.
Mm-hmm.
It does not see that it possibly is something to do with the parents' message.
It has nothing to do with them that they
Yeah.
got from their parents. It's what they experienced, you know. And so it's very difficult for them to ever have an opportunity to begin to recognize spirit. Now, I do want to say that all babies, we know that by watching their eyes, and children in school, which is why I had to start a school myself at one point, they zip out of their body, you know. Babies, they are listening to angels. They are seeing lights. They are connecting to the cosmos. But we snap them back and say, pay attention over here. And very quickly they learn that, you please, Mama, if Mama's in a bad mood, you might have to wait 10 minutes to get fed, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so they very quickly begin to learn buying and selling.
Which leads to that merging outside of ourselves to make us okay.
That's right.
If I do this for you, you'll like me, therefore I'm okay.
And so then the whole thing becomes love. And we humans, that's part of the mandate, to be in human bodies, to understand, quote, unconditional love. We hardly understand love in all of its forms. Never mind a concept is as expanded as unconditional. Because after all, you're the next generation, you're the blood of your parents. They are projecting onto you. Of course they are.
So effectively, what I have done when I allow you or somebody else or something else to validate me, to make me okay, is I've made you God.
That's right. Oh, what an interesting concept. What an interesting idea.
You know, and therefore, I've taken a portion of the whole and made it to replace the whole, and it cannot possibly ever do that.
Yeah. Yes. And that's especially difficult. Let me turn that back around and say that's especially difficult for females, because most people think of God as a male figure. And so, you know, and that leads to a lot of separation. Separation from the father, separation from the male for females, looking for love from the father, which may come in a form that they don't recognize. So as soon as you make anybody God, the source of your truth, if anybody else is the source of your truth, then you have a filter. And I'm talking about that filter. And the filter is anger and loneliness and separation and leave-taking and all of that doesn't allow you to become a part of what you were born to be a part of.
Because then I project that if I even believe in that there is a God, I project these lower experiences to the higher experience,
Exactly.
and I become self-defeating.
Exactly, which you and I were laughing about, that God needs our approval,
Yeah.
that God needs something from us. That is, you know, an oxymoron. That's just ridiculous.
Yes, exactly, but that's what we're told.
And we believe
get that
that. We do
message from
believe
so
that.
many religions.
Yes. That
where
isn't even a
God's
mental
love
thing
is
for us.
conditional,
That's right.
you know, and that eliminates the whole concept of what grace really is in my book.
My favorite word.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
And so let me take that back to this book, because I
ahead.
love the word grace. I may not say it too much in that book, but it is something that I'm talking about in that book, which is that we can't always change that we had a terrible childhood or we had a terrible experience. We can't always change that, but we always have the power to change, to transmute, to transcend through our spiritual source, our essence, the way we react or respond to it. And I learned that from prisoners in Bolivia who were rapists and killers and other things, you know, is that they still had that capacity of consciousness. You can't take that away from someone. So if someone begins to say, I can see that there was purpose in that, I'll never do it again. Maybe that's the purpose, but I can see what I've learned from it, then that makes it worthwhile. So there are no accidents, and it's just the grace. It's the way that you look at something and accept it and are able to love it and respond with grace, rather than try to use the emotional body, and that's what I'm talking about in this book, to defend, to rationalize, to protect, to elude, to escape from what could be something that takes you into peace or grace. And it's hard for us to recognize that a terrible experience can bring us grace, but it can.
Well, we don't have many people teaching it.
We don't.
I mean, that's the problem. It's like there are probably people here who are going to be listening to this show are going to shake their heads and what fool these people are. Why am I watching this show?
I think they're going to all shake their heads and say, that's true, that's true.
That would be nice. I hope it does happen. That's why I do the show. But
of course it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be somebody switching channels, and it's like, what are these people, out of their bird? You know, I mean, but yes, that is the case. You know, that we have that power, we have that choice to choose which part of us we choose to activate.
You know, when I was in the Peace Corps, which was in 1964, at the beginning of the Peace Corps, one of the things that they used to say to us was, if you can change one person's life, it's worth this time in the Peace Corps. And having written that book now, I would say that one person is you.
Always.
If you can change your life, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with it. It means that it's a progression. We can always do it in a more expanded way, which we might judge and say is better. But we can do it, and we do it by incarnating 1,000 times, 1,000 times. We can always do it differently in a way that pleases ourselves, that allows us to comprehend a hologram much bigger than what we thought was true. There you go.
That's my next, you use that phrase a lot. Can you describe that for everybody?
Yes.
What is the hologram?
It's really a simple concept. And that is, you could think of a circle. And a circle is flat, but you can put your finger on any part of the circle. So a hologram is like a circle. You can look at it from this angle, or you could look at it from the other angle. And the moment you start poking and looking at it from different angles on the circle, like spokes in a wheel, you become illuminated. It helps you to see a bigger truth. And so a hologram is like a circle that has 1 trillion points of reference on it, except that it's multidimensional, which means that it's moving, it's spinning, it has many layers, infinite layers. It has layers that are about your daily life. It has layers that have to do with your spiritual essence. It has layers that show you the purpose of experience or somebody else's point of view. That's a hologram. So it just means everything that's connected to this. Everything that could illuminate you, that could help you go, aha, I understand that, I get that now. That would be a hologram. To see it from all of the reference points. Now, to stretch that, we have Einstein's theory of relativity. And he and the Chinese agree on that, in which he says, the Chinese say everything is connected to everything. Mm-hmm. And Einstein said there's relativity, which means that what happens over here in this quadrant of space, in this equation, let's say, is going to influence all the rest. So that's a hologram. It's all of the potential and possibility and reference points, past, present, and future, because past, present, and future don't really exist in the cosmos the way we think of it.
Well, that goes back to that concept of just the different set of energy laws,
yes,
from the physical body to the spiritual body and the multidimensional planes it exists in, and
That's
each
right.
one as to what impact it has on us.
That's right, and the speed of light. The physical body is very, very sensitive because of the endocrine system, which is the infolding or the line between the physical body and the spiritual body, the light body. And so once we begin to be aware of all that, we're faster, we're quicker. We see how the physical body is connected to the spiritual body, which is connected to the emotional body, which is connected to the mind body. They all move around. They're not separate. So we are not separate. And
to, again, take another phrase from the book, to close the circle, to return to the starting point with ever-increasing consciousness.
That's it.
So the circle is the constant meeting of ourselves, looking for alternative explanations that do not come from the emotional or the mental body.
And those explanations are not mental per se. They're not intellectual. They allow you what I call higher mind. Aha. It's the aha in which we all, at that moment, feel truth. And so with all of our 70 senses, we recognize what is truth. And that's why people will nod their heads yes at your program, Reverend Phil, because they will feel the truth of it through the hologram of their consciousness.
Amen to that.
Amen.
We're starting to run down on time. First, want to hold the book up one more time. Maybe we'll do it again. The Healing of Emotion. A must-read, a must-have. They've had the number of the Light Institute.
And bookstores as well.
The Ark, probably.
Probably. Borders. Places where you get videos.
Yeah, but if you can't find it there, the Light Institute out in Galisteo always has.
Yes.
Be happy to send it to you. So you want to read this book. Got it? Good. Okay. Now, a couple of quick announcements. First off, this is public access television, and you, the listening, watching audience, are the public. So, want to hear from you. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what shows you've enjoyed, what shows you haven't enjoyed. Are there topics that you'd like for me to cover? Maybe you have something you want to do on your own. We've done that before. We've had one person on who just watched the show and said, I want to be on your show, and we had him on. In that same context, I've been making the announcement. I'm not going to stop until it happens. This is Santa Fe. How could there not be an Edgar Cayce study group in Santa Fe?
Yay!
So I want to do a show on Edgar Cayce.
I want to be in it.
You want to do it?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Edgar Cayce was the first time that light struck me and completely changed my life. Dear Edgar Cayce.
Oh, me too. We got to talk. We got to talk.
In a meditation group.
Oh.
Blew me out. And opened my life.
There's a whole other conversation,
yes,
but I believe one of the main purposes of my second wife in my life was to introduce me to Edgar Cayce.
Fantastic.
And it was because of Edgar Cayce that I actually got clean.
Wow, how spectacular.
It is. And there's a whole other story behind this, but we don't have time for this.
Let's do it.
I got to tell you, I'll tell you off air. And you'll just have to keep watching until we do the show to hear the story on air. So I'm looking to do a show on Edgar Cayce. Anybody else want to get involved? Chris and I have signed up. You just get a chance to be on the air with us.
Tell us your stories.
Yes. Also, if you haven't figured it out by now, I don't know, I must be doing something wrong. I am, besides doing a TV show, I'm a spiritual counselor. So if there are problems with life on life's terms and you're trying and you're not finding your way out of it, it's because the basic law is we cannot solve the problem with the same instrument that creates the problem. Spirit is what heals. I do spiritual counseling. I work on a donation basis. There's no set fees. So if you think that maybe spiritual counseling can help you deal with whatever these problems are manifesting in your life, call me. My number's been flashing. I'd be happy to meet with you and talk with you. Also, just want to announce that next week we're going to do a show. We're going to have a little panel discussion. We're going to talk about religious intolerance and how do we get to tolerance. There's been too much of that going on in the world lately about intolerance, and that's not what these religions teach, to my best understanding. And we're going to talk about that we're going to try to get representatives of the three major Abrahamic traditions. So tune in next week for that. I think that's it. So we got a few minutes left.
Oh, good. Let me segue that if I can.
Go ahead.
All right. I would like to talk about religious intolerance in terms of this book, fanatics. Fanatics are people who are using God because that is their reference of safety, of reality. And so they cling to God, my God against your God. And that makes them fanatical, and it's really not about God. It's about the terrified emotional body that does not think it will survive. And so God is about as big and strong and powerful as you can get, and so they become fanatical about religion, their religion. So let it not be now and forever, my God against your God, but one divine source.
Exactly. And I want to back up into this book again, because what we're talking about is fear, anger, leading us to merger outside of ourselves. We don't see God inside of ourselves. We see God as outside of ourselves, and I need the power of the group to reinforce the feelings I have and to help me act out on them instead of heal them.
not religion, but spiritual experience is available to us as you and I talk, as somebody walks down the street, as you're laying in your bed, as you're driving your car, as you're brushing your teeth, as you're making love, as you are making money. Everything is an opportunity for a spiritual experience. So I wanted to put that in.
Exactly. But I want to back this up, Dakota, because I think that this is, I've said this on the air before. Fundamentalism is nothing more than addictive anger disguised as religion.
Beautifully said.
That what we talked about earlier. We get addicted to the physical generation of the biochemical reactions.
Of the emotional body.
In the emotional body. And what happens is, like any other drug addiction,
exactly.
You build tolerance and you need more and more to get less and less. So beating up on your family, the dog, and whatever stops to satisfy you, you need a larger target.
And it gets bigger and bigger.
The target gets bigger, and because the target gets bigger, you need more people to help you to conspire against that target. And the anger keeps growing, but you keep getting less out of it.
Yes.
And that is the dynamic of the emotional body and how we wind up in these places where anger and fear disguise themselves as religion.
So I would like to, that's beautifully put, I would like to say a final sentence if we're at the last moment,
we're almost
which is the fearless self. And I would just like to say to all of your audience that inside you is a fearless self, connected to the divine source within you. And that even to think of that, even to sing it to yourself as you're driving along, I have a fearless self, I am fearless, can begin to lift you out of the judgment of your life to a place that's not afraid to speak your truth, that's not afraid to stop and smell a flower, that's not afraid to love someone because they might not love you as much, but to be your true self. And so by lifting your emotional body into reference to the divine source and to the spirit, you can and are the fearless self.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
So one more time, quickly, this is the book, this is the author, that's her on the cover. You need to read this book because if you don't, you will not have the tools you need to start dealing with the emotions that are ruling your life.
Exactly.
So I think we're about getting to an end. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Reverend Phil, it was a great pleasure for me to be here and to listen to your wisdom as well. May there be thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are nodding their head in agreement with me at this moment.
I hope you're right. I pray you're right. Chris will be back in a couple of months. We'll pick another book of hers and we're going to do that. But don't wait to just hear about Chris. Tune in. We do this kind of stuff all the time. So know that what the message is here. You are one with God. God is inside of you. You don't have to let God in. You have to let God out. Yes. It's been put in a little box based upon our experiences and the stuff that's been forced on us. You have the power to let that power out. When you let it out, let it guide you. You'll be amazed at the beauty and the wonder that you can create. Grace is our birthright. We don't have to earn it. We have to get out of the way of blocking it. So until next week, know that you are one with God. You are love. You are light. You create the reality of your existence. You don't think it's working? Take some of the clues and the hints and the stuff we've talked about here. Get the book. And you will start to learn a different way of doing things. So until next week, blessings to you all, love and light. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.